welcome to another roundup, to a weekly roundup of the TRRC proceedings with QTV, and welcome also to our listeners on Q Radio 103.3. This week we had 6 witnesses from the TRRC that testified at the TRRC, 2 of whom had adverse mentions. Another 2 were part of the investigative team that had been sent to go to the accident scene staged by the junta to cover up the brutal murder of Trrc. Another witness said that he still has in his leg, lodged in his leg, a bullet shot by Edward Singate. And finally, we heard from a witness who was known in the army as the assassin, yet this assassin did no evil, saw no evil, and only grudgingly admitted that heard some evil existed, but somehow it was always out of his view. Today on the TRRC Roundup, as usual, I'm joined by my 2 amigos, Babukar Sise on my right and Ansumana Eso Nyasi. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, 6 witnesses. The first one quite was the interesting one. I think that's the one I ended up with, the assassin. Sure. Yes, so the assassin, well, he was called Pa, wasn't it? Lamin Senghor, and apparently at home he was known as Pa, and in the army he was known as the assassin. So I said, oh, there we can have a Pa assassin there.
Yeah, I covered. I actually covered that story.
You covered it. You covered his story.
Yeah, at home Pa Senghor.
Yes.
You know, at work is Lamin Senghor, but yes, nicknamed the assassin, and obviously the word assassin is not a good connotation.
That in itself is a story of its own.
Yeah, it's not a good connotation anyway.
Absolutely.
But then again, this is a man who knew a lot of things, who should be privy of a lot of things that happen. But we are not getting, information as required again. He was in the army. November 10th, he was at State House with the junta members. They hold a meeting with the council members. They said they went upstairs with the chairman, they discussed something, they came down, and then Edward Singate furnished him about they need volunteers, that's his word, to go and quench or quell a coup in the making. And then he said 47 of them volunteered, according to him. No need for him to take a new weapon because he had his previous weapon he was having. And then they went straight to Yundum Barracks first through Abuko. I think he said, Banjurunding, Abuko. And then on arrival again, he missed some points. He missed the ambush where Mafuji Sonko and others were ambushed. Dabo were ambushed. He missed that point. For him, it was in an ambush. They went into the camp and they were waiting. And then he mentioned actually two or three arrests there. That is Basiru Barrow's arrest, Dot Fal's arrest, and Ablai J. Dabo's arrest, which he said he even arrested Ablai J. Dabo. Then he said he regretted arresting him because he was his class, he know him, but then because it was in view of other junta members, he have no choice but to hand him over. But again, as we have heard from other witnesses that when Dot Fal was arrested, he was severely beaten, Mafuji Sonko and all the others, and in fact Dot Fal was with a broken jaw, Basiru Barrow broken neck. This man missed all those points. He didn't mention any. And even Mafuji's description of they were crawling, and whilst they were crawling, they were being kicked like football. Yes. He said you can't dump for Kadi in the football, like the football. Exactly. Absolutely. Exactly. But he painted an entirely different picture. He missed all those stories in his testimony. And as far as he's concerned, everyone arrested there is put into a cell and locked up. He didn't see anyone beaten or anyone tortured at Yundum Barracks. So obviously, because he didn't see anything, he couldn't narrate anything. So the testimony was actually shot there, and then the next moment they moved to Fajara Barracks. Yes. So what happened when they got to Fajara? When they get to Fajara Barracks again, under the leadership of Sana Sabali, of course, he said they went to the back gate again and started going towards inside the barracks, and then they were firing, and then they went. He said the gun he was carrying is actually a heavy machine gun, and it's like 8 kilograms. I mean, the weight of the gun is like 8 kilograms, so it must be a heavy gun. That's the GPMG. GPMG, General Purpose Machine Gun. Yes, And then he said because of the weight and the gas, you know, once they reached, they took over the camp, he said he didn't collapse before they take over. After taking over the camp, you know, obviously, according to other witnesses, some officers were arrested at that point again. But for him, I mean, when they arrived and took over the camp, he collapsed. And the collapse is caused by, you know, two things. One, exhausted because the gun was heavy. But the other thing was, he said, gas emitted, you know, by the gun. So obviously, at that point, there was a bit push and pull between him and the council, because the council was trying to put to him that the gas cannot make him collapse, but he was adamant.
And even much more than that, because in his written statement, he had written that he collapsed from exhaustion.
Yes.
And then he changed to gas.
Yes.
And then I think he wanted to change again. He kept flip-flopping between gas and exhaustion.
Yes.
So which was quite.
So at the end, I think he said both. I think he said both.
Yes, in the end, he said he settled for both.
Yeah, he settled for both. But then again, he was unconscious. He was put in a stretcher and taken to a room.
Well, he said he collapsed, but he wasn't unconscious, which was an interesting.
Well, he said he mentioned collapse, and then at that point we thought like he collapsed because he was unconscious. But he was saying, even though he collapsed, but he could hear when people are talking. So he said they took him to a room, and whilst in that room, he could hear, you know, them saying that the arrested officers are going to be taken to mile 2. So I don't know the distance between where he was taken and where these officers were, because according to other testimony, these officers were paraded at Fajara Barracks, because that's where the first killing started.
Yes,
that's where they paraded, and then Sana was counting upon 3, and they started firing at them. But for him, you know, that's what is the case. In fact, he said, as far as he's concerned, not a single person is wounded at Fajara Barracks. And probably if he said he collapsed and didn't hear anything, that could be something sensible. But I collapsed, but I could hear. If you can hear, why is it that you didn't hear gunshots? You know, but the only thing he had was, you know, take the arrested officers to mile 2. And at that point, he said for himself, Sana asked them that all the State Guard personnel should go back to State House. He
was the only one that heard that. No other witness has ever said something like that.
So that simply means it is clear that he did not go back, according to his testimony, he didn't go back to Yundum Barracks.
And quite a number of witnesses have said that they returned to Yundum Barracks.
Yes, and when they arrived, this car the Land Rover was parked, and then they started putting in the officers to go and execute them in Brikama Forest. So obviously he missed all those points, because obviously from Fajara Barracks, he went straight to State House. So no mention of forest, he's not aware. No mention of Sifo, he's not aware.
Selective memory. Fantastic. So they go back to State House.
Yes.
And then what happened there?
Well, he said they went back to State House.
Do we know about the jubilation? We've heard about
that. He didn't mention anything about the jubilation. He did not. But then again, you know, from there, he mentioned about the training he had as to be a jungler. You know, the notorious jungler that people accuse of committing a lot of atrocities.
Jamis Hit Squad.
Okay, others call them that name.
Yeah. And
then he said he was trained as a jungler. But at that point also, when they asked him what kind of training he was receiving, he said anti-terrorism. Counter-terrorism training that he was receiving. But again, the council put it on me that they are trained to kill. I mean, he didn't budge at the beginning, but at the end, he said yes, they were trained to kill. But trained to kill as a jungler, he said, up to the time he left being a jungler, he's never tortured anybody, he's never killed anybody, and he's never witnessed anybody being tortured or killed as a jungler. Then that's where the issue of Doumbouya, Corporal Doumbouya came in, you know.
Who's this Corporal Doumbouya?
Corporal Doumbouya was a man who was killed at Banjul when Albert Market, when Almamo Mane and others were accused of
murdering him.
Yes.
Okay. So what happened?
The issue of Doumbouya also came in, where, you know, he said he was one of those who was, you know, sent to go and arrest Doumbouya. But again, before he got to Doumbouya, he had 2 gunshots and Doumbouya was already dead. So he did not actually participate in the killing of Doumbouya. But then again, from there he moved to the NIA.
Okay.
You know,
he had quite an interesting career within the security sector.
Yes.
Moving from unit to unit.
Yes, and NIA as a security guard. So I don't know how he left the army and became an NIA security guard. I don't know how it happened. Maybe he retired or resigned, I don't know. But then he became a security guard at the NIA. And as a security guard, obviously, he admitted at that point that he's seen people who were tortured. You know,
so he heard.
Yeah.
Well,
he heard. That's
according
what
to
he kept
hearsay.
Yes.
Yes. He said according to hearsay. He had never seen anything, he had never done anything, but heard afterwards that such things were going on.
Yes.
All right.
But then when at some point he was actually changed from security guard to NIA operative, you know, and then even as that he said again, he's never seen anybody tortured and he's never tortured anybody when he was at the NIA. Again, from the NIA, he moved to the drug squad, and then at the drug squad again, I think he was working under somebody called More Job. You know, that was his boss. Actually, they were at the NIA together, and when war was moving, they moved together again. But even though More is labeled as a notorious, you know, person at the NIA and both at the drug squad, he said again he worked there for some time, but according to him, nobody was ever tortured or beaten in his presence. You know, it's a man who claimed his innocence throughout the whole process.
And we also know that he was an interrogator at Mile 2.
Yes,
he did interrogations.
The issue came up at Mile 2 when Colonel Sanyang, Lieutenant Colonel Sanyang, was arrested after the arrest of Sana Sabali, where he was accused of, you know, probably visiting Sana Sabali or be in company with Sana Sabali, and he was being interrogated. But also he said at Mile 2, when he went to interrogate them, he personally interrogated.
Was it RSM Fai? Did he interrogate?
He mentioned 3 names.
Yes.
He said Sanyang and RSM Fai and someone else. He mentioned 3 names.
Yes.
But then again, according to the investigation, we realized that some people were not even present.
And that was Musa Sise?
Musa Sise, yes.
Musa Sise.
And then some of them were not even present according to, I think the names were missed at that point. But
present.
Sanyang's case was prominent there because it was Sanyang who first mentioned his name, that led by Alaji Martin, he was the part of those who put a plastic bag around his neck and then suffocated him until he collapsed. He nearly died. And then this man said yes, he went there and he personally took permission from Martin to interrogate this man because they have a beef, you know, a few months ago where he think he was being victimized by Sanyang, you know. So he questioned Sanyang about that issue, and then Sanyang answered, and they said at the end, you know, he forgave Sanyang. He didn't even touch him, not even a finger on Sanyang. But then there the contradictions happened because Sanyang, you know, was very, very vivid in his explanation about how the plastic bag was put around his neck and then how he was beaten until he collapsed, you know. But then this man said no. He said we didn't even do anything to him, and we returned. And the council said you took them back to the cell. He said yes, we took them back to the cell untouched. He said yes, untouched.
Absolutely. But of course, quite interesting, Yansman, I think I can bring you in here. His inconsistencies really began at the bridge in 1994. He tried to portray a kind of Rambo-style bravado that when they got to the bridge, seeing that the gendarmerie were trying to resist. So he had his magazines, as it were, his guns, the chain wrapped around him with the GPMG, and walked over. I mean, that was quite, it was like a fantasy.
That was the first time actually
we've
had anything like that. Of all the witnesses who've testified, we know, I mean, now, of course, if we can, of course, rely, you know, on what most of the witnesses, I mean 90% of the witnesses have said, that there was some form of negotiation between, you know, the soldiers and members of the tactical support group who were led by Suware, you know, at the bridge. But he made no mention of that, and he tried to sell this theory that he was, you know, the only one who walked, I mean, right through the bridge, with his weapon, and then, you know, issued this threat to the, I mean, opposing forces that, I mean, if you fire and you miss, I'll fire, but I am going. Something we know really didn't happen. In fact, at that point, I remember the lead counsel telling him, I mean, that's not true, it's incorrect. And then he said, yes. And he said, you're lying. He said, yes, that was the first time. So you're right, his inconsistencies actually began at the bridge. And also, I don't get it how one would, you know, would collapse, But yet...
Yes, and even before you get to that, yes, we'll have a clip here because that's it. It was the inconsistency between the written statement that he had given and that what he was saying orally. So that's it. So when counsel really pinned him, I remember the silence, the guilty silence. Just take a look at this clip.
So when I reached the Denton Bridge, at the KMC end of the bridge, I found soldiers on the prone position, so I couldn't understand why. So the first person I met, I asked him, what is going on? He said the other side of the bridge, that is the Banjul end, is occupied by the Zandam commandos. And they said that if anybody attempts to cross the bridge, they will fire you. So I then asked the boy, so now what? He was even annoyed. He wanted to shout on me, or he was annoyed about my inquiries. He told me, boy, hey, we are working on orders. If they didn't give the order, how can we go? So I just took my machine gun, start moving. So
towards where?
Towards Banjul. So I moved at a certain level. I turned back and saw now soldiers have started getting up. So the gendarmes were threatening us. If you move, we fire. I said, fire. If you fail, I fire. So they were entering the river till around knee level. Maybe they know they cannot continue going, so they surrendered.
So you're suggesting that you went kamikaze along the road towards Banjul, and you threatened the gendarmerie with your machine gun?
No, they threatened me to stop. If I don't stop, they will fire.
And you responded that if they do not succeed...
They can fire. If they fail, I will fire also.
And ultimately they surrendered?
Yes.
That is your testimony?
Yes.
And that is how you guys had access to the bridge?
Yes.
That is what you are telling the commission?
Yes.
Mr. Witness, we've had completely different testimony. The testimony is that Yaya Jammeh negotiated with Armiao. That was Captain Suare. And Captain Suare asked his men to surrender and join the coupists. No mention of Lamin Senghor acting kamikaze, lone soldier getting the gendarmerie to surrender. What do you say to that?
I still maintain my statement, Counsel.
That it was your show of bravery and brandishing a machine gun which led the gendarmerie to surrender? That's what you're telling us?
Yes, the side I was on, because I was around the swampy area.
But do you recall giving us a statement, which you in fact signed this morning?
Yes.
Let me send it back to you to take a look at. Is that the statement?
Yes, this is my statement.
That's the statement you signed?
Yes.
This morning?
Yes.
Go through the pages and satisfy yourself that this is in fact the document? That's the statement, correct?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chair, at the end of his testimony, we would ask to put in the statement as part of the record. We would give you the exhibit number if you so agree to add it into the record.
Agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I draw your attention to paragraph 4, please, of the statement?
Yes.
And I will just read out the relevant excerpt very quickly. You said somewhere in the middle of paragraph 4, that is page 5 of the statement, and I read the sentence starting with, then we departed, they then departed before I finished loading the pickup. It's in the middle of the page. Can you see it?
Yes.
And you went on to say as follows, and I quote, they then departed before I finished loading the pickup, and I later caught up with them at the Combo side of Denton Bridge. Full stop. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
That's what you told the investigators?
Yes.
Then it went on to say, I asked the one soldier who I cannot recall about what was happening, and he told me that the gendarmerie commandos were on the other side of the bridge and wouldn't allow them to cross. After some negotiations between our leaders and the leaders of the gendarmerie, we finally crossed the bridge and were also joined by the gendarmerie, unquote. That's your statement, isn't it?
Yes.
So this story about assassin walking along the road, lone soldier brandishing a machine gun, telling those soldiers that if you shoot and don't succeed, I will shoot, and that led them to surrender, is in fact not true.
Yes.
Why are you telling us that story, knowing fully well it's not true?
Absolutely, gentlemen. That's like kids' fantasies of power. Surely, he probably watched the movie Rambo.
Really, we all know that the junglers, have been accused of committing, some of the most heinous crimes that, took place under Jammeh's watch, under Jammeh's rule. For someone, of his caliber to have served in the army and then, went to the junglers training, served in the junglers for a certain period, and then the National Intelligence Agency, then to the drug squad, having worked under the notorious Mor Job, In fact, I remember he said during his testimony that it was when Mor Job was transferred from the NIA to lead the newly established Drug Law Enforcement Agency that he went with Mor Job because he was working under Mor Job. And he was not even officially transferred. He went and joined Mor Job. And, so I think for me, his testimony for me, I think it will go down as one of the most controversial testimonies. And I want to believe this is one of the reasons why, he is placed under custody.
Absolutely, and the fact that as an interrogator, I remember the lead counsel asking him, how was your success rate as an interrogator? He said, very high, very good. So perhaps really that is an indication of really how good a torturer he was.
If you could remember, when Chongan and the other security chiefs who, were first arrested, in the aftermath of the coup testified, they made mention of the fact that Alaji Martin would come with his men to Mile 2, and then would be interrogating some of these officers who were arrested at the time, and that they would torture some of them in the process. He said, of course he admitted, that he's been to Mile 2, to interrogate some of the officers who were arrested. Yet he's denied, torturing anyone. And we know, of course, now we've heard from other witnesses that really, some of them were tortured.
Absolutely. And I like his line when he said, when a bullet talks, no mouth will talk. Remarkable people. Thank you very much for your views there. Now to our next witness, who was it? Alaji Kebe?
Yes.
Yes.
Alaji
So
Kebe.
you covered Alaji Kebe. He was born in 1957, and when did he enlist? Was it 1989?
He enlisted in the army in 1989.
Yes.
I think as far as his testimony is concerned, there are two main, incidents that really I think, would be the talking points in his testimony, which would be the first is the bullet that he still has in his right thigh, which he sustained after he was shot by Edward Singate, and also the fact that he was put in a car boot. They had him in a car boot, running around town for 5 hours, and then they came to him with the barracks. I think that, these are for me the main talking points in his testimony. So he said it was on the 10th of November, on the night of the 10th, that, I think he was out of the barracks. Then he came in, he met Edward Singate, who, asked him to surrender his weapon. Then he did, and then he went to his room because he was staying at the barracks with his family at the time. So he said as soon as he entered his house, he had gunshots, and because of course there were rumors of coup or whatever, something of that sort. So he decided he was going to evacuate his family to his in-laws house in Banjulundi, which he did. And because of the situation at the barracks that night, he thought it would be wise to stay away at least for a couple of days. So he was at his in-laws house for 3 days, and then it was the third day actually, after he prayed 5 o'clock, that they came for him. And I think I remember he mentioned by Samba Jallo, Peter Singate, Lamin Fati, and the Kanilai, Bubajame Kanilai, who came for him. And he said when they came for him, they put him in the car boot. And when he was asked to enter the car boot, he said Lamin Fati actually has said to his wife, who was crying and pleading with them, that, why would you cry? He's just a man. If he's dead today, tomorrow you get another husband. And
that was what Lamin Fati said.
Yes, in fact, we'll of course hear from Lamin Fati later that he did say that. So he said he was forced to enter the car boot. In fact, it wasn't really quite spacious for him to be able to fit in, but then he had to squeeze himself in there, and he said this was around 5, and then of course we'll hear from Lamin Fati later, who would deny the fact that really he was in that boot for 5 hours. But he said when they arrived at the camp, because of course he said the car, actually they were with him until at some point when he realized that the car had stopped. Then they opened the car boot and asked him to come down. Then he said as soon as he entered the military police room, at the barracks, he turned and then he looked at the clock. It was 10 p.m. So he said as soon as he entered one of the rooms there, he was slapped, by JCB Mendy.
Yes.
One, of course, of the witnesses who've testified already. And then he said he fell, he woke up, he was asked to sit, and then he was having this chat with Sana Sabali, who was asking him questions, of course, now relating to November 11 for a coup. And then he said, while he was talking to Sana, Edward Singate shot him, on the right thigh, and in fact wanted to finish him off, but he was stopped by Sana Sabali, who, because he was bleeding profusely, he called the attention of the medics at the time, one SAR, who came for him. So he said he was there, they took him to the hospital. He spent, I think, almost a month at the hospital. Then he was taken to Mile 2, and there he was until his release, and then he was issued with a certificate, indicating that he had voluntarily retired from the army. Something he has denied as well. But what I found interesting in his testimony is the fact that he still has this bullet in his right thigh, 25 years after he was shot.
Perhaps it might take a special kind of surgery for the bullet to be removed, and perhaps just couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford it. Quite fascinating. What did you make of that?
It's interesting. It's interesting, but just like we heard from other people that these victims need help. Imagine somebody living with a bullet in your leg for 25 years. He need urgent help, because I think he was even limping when he was coming to testify. So obviously he need urgent overseas treatment so that this bullet can be removed from his leg. Imagine all the years he was living with this pain. So it's really a sad story as well, like many other people that we've seen and will hear again in future.
Yes, but the TRRC will take care of that at some point, the reparations element of it. So we go on to our next witness. Was it Babukar Mboop?
Yes. Babukar Mboop.
Tell us about Babukar Mboop. He was an orderly to the president, to then President Yahya Jammeh.
Yes, he served us oddly on the Jammeh.
And he was also adversely mentioned.
Yes, this was when Jammeh was chairman of the AFPRC Council. He is a witness who's been adversely mentioned, like you've said. And of course, he said he enlisted in the army in 1991. And his testimony focused mainly on the November 11 incident, the executions that happened on the following morning and the night of the 10th of November. He said, you know, he was in his house when he had gunshots, and then he rushed out to see what was happening, you know. Then he said, as soon as he arrived around the anteroom, he had, I mean, Edward Singate, you know, yelling out orders, saying, bring me Fafanyang, bring Fafanyang. And then he saw Fafanyang, you know, being brought out.
And actually, early on, he said he got to know about what was planned for November 11th from Fafanyang, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, he was on a walk. He was taking a stroll.
With his
wife. Passed by Fafanyang's house, and there he was informed of what was to happen.
What was to happen? Yes.
Interesting. And then the same Fafanyang.
Yes.
So afterwards, he saw this Fafanyang.
Yeah, Fafa was brought out, but he said he was being kicked, you know, and you know, they were beating him and kicking him, and then he said Fafa was forced, you know, to run for his life. He was asked to run for his life. So,
but didn't we have a witness testify that it was actually, was it Fafanyang? Was it Kanye? Who brought out Fafanyang? Was it Kanye and Mboop?
Yes.
That was where he was mentioned.
Yes.
That they were the two that brought out Fafanyang.
Yes, we've heard that from other witnesses.
Yes.
With the oddlies there, I don't think it will be one person. If an order is there, I think they'll all rust. I think it had a few people dragging one person out.
That's it. So he's confirming that actually many people were there kicking him and the rest.
Yes,
of
but he's denied, you know, the allegation that he was, it was him and Kanye who brought out Fafanyang. He said it was Kanye and he couldn't remember the second person, but he was there when Fafa was brought out and he was being kicked. And then he was asked to run for his life. So he said, as Fafa was, you know, trying to run away, he said he saw Sergeant Balajiba and Gassama, you know, Sergeant Gassama taking, firing positions. And then he had a gunshot, but he couldn't really tell if it was either Gassama or Jiba who first, shot Fafa, you know. But then he saw him, you know, then Fafa fell to the ground, and then he saw Koli, you know, take a firing position and then finish him off. So at that point, he was asked whether...
Haven't we heard a witness say that it was Edward Singate who took the first shot?
Yes.
Yes.
We've
One
had
of the
witnesses
witnesses
say
said Edward
that
Singate took the first shot. But whatever happens, Edwards was online, Gassama was there, Jiba was there. So it could be any of them. But then some people say Edward Singate took the first shot.
Yeah.
And then this guy said
and
it's
somehow
either
Koli
Jiba or
was there
Gassama.
as well. I mean, Koli was somehow there.
Koli was there.
You know? Okay.
Yes. But then at that point, he was asked by the lead counsel if, you know, what he makes of the suggestion that Koli had, you know, accidentally shot Fafanyang, you know. He said no, he was there, and he can say really that Koli had deliberately, you know, intentionally shot Fafanyang, you know. And after that, he said he could remember, Papu Gomez, you know, who was the RSM at the time, you know, he brought out Lieutenant Jibril say, tied his hands behind, and then, you know, pushed him into the
Land Rover
that was there, and, you know, other officers, you know, also were put in the Land Rover, and then they are whisked away to the forest. Now he said he was present at the Nyambai forest, where the executions took place, and I remember he also said as soon as they arrived at the forest, Sana Sabali had asked the soldiers who were arrested to come down. They came down. They were asked to take.
Kneel down.
You know, they were asked to kneel down, and then they were asked to say their last prayers, you know. But then there was this silence, you know, from all of them. And at that point, he said, Sana had, you know, ordered that they should shoot, you know. And he said, really, that was the first time he's admitted that he took part in those executions. That he also took a firing position. In fact, he said he stood in front. He was the one who stood in front, and, you know, he was the first to fire.
Yes. And afterwards, he served for a long time, didn't he, as orderly to the president. But council didn't go much into that period, isn't it? Apparently, yes. they will call him back for that. So from there, what did he do?
Yes. So from there, he didn't make mention of going to Sifo, which we know from other witnesses that from Nyambai Forest they did go to Sifo as well. But, you know, he didn't mention that. He said he didn't go there. Now, of course, we also heard from other witnesses that from Nyambai and Sivo Forest, they went back to the barracks where Sergeant EMCC and, of course, Basiru Kamara were killed after that. But he said, of course, we also heard from other witnesses, if you can remember, who, accused him of, taking part in the executions of these two officers. That he's denied as well. He said, by the time they came back, those people were dead already. So he did not take part in those executions. He's denied those allegations as well. But we've heard from, at that point, of course, they played him this, the testimony of, say, Dabo, of that of Alaji Kanyi, where he, of course, was implicated, as really being one of those officers who took part in the execution of these two officers, but he's denied those allegations. Absolutely.
So in the end, we know that at some point he left. Yes. What were the circumstances? Why did he leave? What happened to him in the army?
Well, of course, he fell out as well with of course, the former president, like we've heard from other witnesses as well. It's been the same routine. So once they fell out, he decided to leave the country, I think in 2004.
In 2004.
And he relocated to the U.S., where he is now.
Yes, he gave his testimony via Skype.
Video conference.
Video conferencing. Yes, so Babakar, this is quite interesting. Now we are beginning to get more of the, what we might call the foot soldiers, because most of these people were private corporals, and they were the ones actually who formed the entourage in many ways, who formed the entourage of the junta members. But we are beginning to see that even if they're going to acknowledge any wrongdoing, they tend to do it begrudgingly, maybe just one. It's only Alaji Kanji so far who's been willing to confront. This is quite interesting. So it's making the whole process a bit funny. Yes. Hence we are having prosecutions, parallel prosecutions in the court.
Yes, interestingly, Alaji Kanji did very well in his explanations. That's why, even though he committed such heinous crimes, people still have more sympathy to Alaji Kanji. You see, people would sympathize more of somebody who comes clean, tell the truth, rather than somebody who comes there and make people annoyed. Because Alaji Kanji was crying. Alaji Kanji, when he started his testimony, I was very annoyed myself. Later on, I started crying with him, and I felt for him. You know. But then for these people who will come, and then obviously, it's not only the council who will know you are not telling the truth. They are not more intelligent than all of us here. People all over the world are watching, and they could tell, you could sense that, it's trying to hide the truth, it's not telling the truth, and it makes people very angry. That's why when we hear that they are arrested, everybody celebrates, because we know you've left something behind that is very important. As they said, the Gambia people need to know, the victim's family, they need to know what has happened to their loved ones. It acts as, knowing that someone is killed is one thing, your family member, but knowing what circumstances led to his death acts as a purgative. It helps you relieve the pain inside you sometimes. At least you know the truth. Yeah. So we've seen these people not...
And even having access to the body, to the corpse, to give it a decent burial.
We've seen them accepting one responsibility, and that's it, even though they are in the other places. Like this one, according to him, he was at the forest. 6 officers were executed. He was there. Then apart from the forest, that's it. What happened? Because from the forest, how did he manage to escape the junta members and he wasn't at Sifo? How did it happen? How is it that he didn't witness the killing of Fafanyang? EMCC, Basiru Kamara.
Damage limitation. They're trying damage limitation. We'll see how far that can take them. Let's go straight to our next witness, Ansumana.
Major Lamin Fati.
You covered Fati. Okay. So what is the interesting thing about Fati? Anything new? What do we get from Fati?
Fati's testimony, like that of Kebe, also focused on actually 2 main incidents, which would be the arrest.
He was also adversely mentioned.
Adversely mentioned, yes, which would be the arrest of, officers after the November 11 incident, from their homes to the barracks, and also the torture of officers at Mile 2 prisons. So his testimony focused mainly on these 2. He, of course, like Kebe said in his testimony, he's also admitted that he is one of those officers who, accompanied Peter Gomez and Bachamba Jallo, to arrest, some of the officers who, were, of course, they had a list of officers who they were going to arrest after the executions. And he, Bachamba Jallo, Peter Singate, and Bojame Kanilai went to, Corporal Alaji Kebe's house, in-laws house in Banjul to arrest him. And he admitted putting him in the boot He also admitted.
Okay, so he confirmed what Kebe
Yes,
had claimed,
claimed.
that he was put in the boot. So he said yes.
Yes, and
he was
also,
part of
I mean, confirmed what Kebe had said, that he said something to his wife, you know, that if we kill him today, tomorrow you get another husband, you know, that he's admitted as well. But he's denied, I mean, the theory that Kebe was put in the boot for 5 hours. He said it didn't take that long, maybe because, I mean, of his condition and the situation he was in. That is why he thought it was that long. But of course, Kebe, I don't think, you know, would be blind enough to see, you know, 10 o'clock on the clock, and then he would say it's 1 o'clock. Really, I think he also, like you said,
even 5 minutes is just too much. It's just the whole idea of putting somebody in a boot.
In the boot, yes.
That is really the dreadful idea.
If you look at this, Banyuling and the Union camp, it's 5 minutes drive.
Of course.
Obviously, but then if you are under stressful condition, if that's the case, because the council was trying to put to him that they were actually driving around, trying to leave him in the boot to punish him in some way, or probably they went to the barracks and parked the car and forget, let's wait until when it's dark, we can deal with him. Who knows what happened?
At any rate, he conceded that they did that.
Yes.
And then
I think where he kind of got it all controversial is when he said that from Kebe's house they went to Bundung to arrest Trawale as well. You know, so I mean, there I, you know, begin to think just maybe, you know, what Kebe said is true, because we know from Banjuluning to Bundung, obviously, it wouldn't take you an hour's drive, but, you know, given that they had a list of officers that they were, you know,
so they were
going to arrest, so I think they were going around arresting them. And in fact, he said when they arrested Kebe, they went to Bundung as well to arrest Trawale, the medic. And when they arrested him, he also wanted to put him in the boot, but he was stopped by Peter Singate. And he said, according to him, he said, that was the first time I saw Peter put up, I mean, a human face. And then counsel was, I mean, I had to ask him to explain that. What do you mean by human face? He said, well, I know that was the first time he had saw, you know, some kind of remorse, you know, some kind of sympathy. And then from Trawale, they went to the camp. But he didn't make mention of where Kebe was shot. But of course, he did say that as soon as they entered there, Kebe, you know, was being interrogated by Sana Savare. That's where he stopped. But he moved on to say that at Fajara Barracks, when they arrested Trawale, they took him to Fajara Barracks first. And he said at Fajara Barracks, he was asked to crawl. So while he was crawling, he said, yes, I kicked him, you know, and then Peter shot him on the leg. So that was the only time he mentioned someone shooting someone, you know. Okay. So his testimony had focused mainly on that. So
he saw Peter shooting
Elijah
Kebe. That was Elijah Kebe, wasn't it? Absolutely.
He was the one kicking him.
But he was kicking him.
Yes, and then Peter shot him. Now, when he was asked about, you know, some of the officers who were detained at Mile 2 that were allegedly tortured, you know, while in detention, that he denied outright. He said he didn't even go to Mile 2.
But wasn't he part of an entourage of one of these senior officers? Was it Peter? Who was it? Wasn't he part of an entourage?
Peter.
He was part of Peter's entourage.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, but then he didn't take part in the atrocities. He said, except for the kick.
For the kick, yes.
That he gave to Elijah Kebe.
For the kicks and then put in
the
boot.
Okay.
But then for the killings in the forest, no, he didn't.
Yes, he denied the forest. And he denied going to Mile 2 and Sifo as well. Now, at this point, he was shown Senghor's, testimony, the assassin, Parliament Senghor, and he was also shown Elijah Kanye's testimony
and Abdullah
Dabo's testimony. He denied all of that. So, at that point, he was asked, do you want to make us believe that whatever these people are saying is not true? He said, well, I know, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't go to the forest and I didn't go to Mile 2.
But this is quite interesting, which is quite inconsistent with what we've had so far, that most of these junta members or the senior army officers, they always moved around with their orderlies and entourage. They have their security outfit, and most of the dirty work was all done.
They move with orderlies, and obviously, Mr. Mboj, it's like when your boss walks into your office or your home with a handbag, what do you do first? You go and take the bag from him. You want to carry the bag from him. Yes. So obviously, that's why they said the orderlies were more brutal than even the leaders themselves. And that could be the case, because at that point also, Mr. Mboj, you can remember that these people are junior officers, and most of them have no promotion. They were privates. So could it be a case whereby they are looking for promotion? Let me impress my boss, and I'll be promoted. You understand what I mean? So obviously...
Absolutely. It's one of those. It's just the psychology of the underling, the psychology of the subordinate. Absolutely. They can seem so full of enthusiasm.
Yes. I mean...
you are right. You are right, because remember when Artem Jen, in his testimony, he said Kanye was not part of, the junta's entourage, but then he just voluntarily joined them and, in fact, became one of the key perpetrators.
That's it. So in this situation, obviously, where I'm basing my thing is, how did they escape the forest and Sifo? Because these are people who were with the entourage. How did they manage to sneak out? They were not able to explain to us how they were able to sneak out to miss the Brikama forest and Sifo. How did they miss it? Because as far as we know, all of them were together to the end.
Yes, and they always insisted that that was the security outfit. Yes. You had to be with the junta member or the senior officer.
All of them would now come up with claims that something happened, because we learned that Yankuba Ture collapsed at Yundum Barracks, because of his jujus. When they first mentioned, Yankuba was rushing to hit Basiru Barrow, and then he collapsed. And then another person took that one probably and said, when I go to Fajara Barracks, I collapsed.
That was it. That was really my thinking, that perhaps this person had plagiarized.
Yes.
That was a piece of plagiarism. I just plagiarized and taken, the fact that Yankuba had collapsed.
So
I said, let me use it to cover.
Also collapsed.
And then to cover
and
certain
again,
things.
somebody said, from Yundum Barracks, from Fajara Barracks, I went to State House. So they are trying, we can see, as the council said, extricate themselves from where the most heinous crime took place. That is the killing at Fajara Barracks, Brikama Forest, and Sifo. So all these oddlies are now trying to remove themselves. Something might happen. Someone else will come. He will say probably he has a broken leg or something, that's why I didn't go. So we'll see a lot of testimonies, conflicting ones that obviously people may not believe that they are not in the killing field.
And this one is still serving?
Yes, he's still serving. He's a major.
He's a major
yes.
in the army.
Yes.
Then we'll see how other testimonies either corroborate or contradict.
Yes, indeed.
So far, we've had lots of contradictions, and we'll see how his story will pan out. Now we go to our next one. Is it the final one? Is it
LK Bojang. Mohammed LK Bojang.
Mohammed LK Bojang. Because he was with the Serious Crimes Unit, wasn't he? He was one of the investigators.
Detective, yeah.
Detective, wasn't he? So take us through his testimony.
Well, his testimony focused mainly on the assassination of the former Finance Minister Osman Koro Sise. And I remember he said something that I found quite interesting in his testimony was when he was talking about Jammeh and his attitude at the time, during their time in Zanalmori. And of course, we've heard from, Njai, who also served as his ADC at some point, Dembanjai. When he in his testimony, he said, Jammeh had come to him one morning and said, boy, yesterday I went to Bakau police station with my boys and we beat them, we dealt with them mercilessly. He said he was the officer in charge of the police station, that particular day, and he also did confirm that really Jammeh and his men went there and they fought, they beat them up and all of that. But his testimony focused mainly...
that one was quite interesting because we heard the story, we had the tale earlier, much earlier, that there was this policeman when they went to the police station, to Macau police station. Now we've met the victim, Jammeh's victim. This was when, back in 1992?
Yes, 1992. He's confirmed that, actually. But his testimony focused mainly on the Koro Sise assassination. He said, once it happened, he was one of the officers from the Serious Crime Unit who first went to the alleged, crime scene, which we now know was, kind of staged at the time. He said when he arrived, he could see that the car was burnt, to ashes from inside. But then, in front where you have the engine and also where the car number plate is, everything was intact.
Everything was intact.
So looking at that, and also he said he, took a walk like 100 meters away from where, the accident allegedly took place, and he could tell really, there is no sign that would show that, there was an accident.
No skid marks on the road, no dent on the car.
No dent on the car.
So as if there was no collision.
No collision.
There was no collision.
Yes.
No skid marks.
Sure.
So these were the telltale signs.
Yes.
To tell him that this is a put-up job.
So what he did was he removed the number plate, which he took to his office, in Banjul. But he said, he really at that point concluded that this was staged. There's no way this could have been an accident. You know, when there's nothing to show that really there was an accident, you know, it's either there was a collision, or the car must have somersaulted, or it must have, you know, there's just nothing really to show that this was an accident. So at that point he said this was what he believed. But because, you know, he was digging deep into, you know, whatever must have led to Koro's assassination or his unfortunate death, you know, then he was shown the exit door. He was fired.
Absolutely, and it wasn't
Well,
it quite interesting that, I mean, the junta, I mean, their behavior so far, what we are getting from the testimonies, they were really behaving like lords. They were lords of all they surveyed, and yet they wanted to manage the media, because staging that, you wanted to whitewash, you had done something, but they wanted to whitewash the fact of Koro's brutal killing. They could have just dumped the body and just forgotten about it. Why try to stage manage?
Yes,
that's quite
because
interesting.
the interesting thing is, if you do, sometimes you plan, but you know, you may fail at some point, because Mr. Boy, generally in a vehicle, if there should be a fire in a vehicle, where would it normally start? It should be in the engine, I suppose. That's where all the noise and all the, you know, locomotive starts. But then in this situation, you know, the boot was closed. It's not the engine. Probably, according to what they say, they allegedly put kerosene or gas well inside the car and then set it alight. That's why the boot was still closed. You know, they didn't start from the boot, because obviously fire should have started there, but it started inside. That's why the number plate was left intact. So obviously, all the evidence have shown that Koro, the accident was staged, and Koro was actually murdered. Just as we heard from other witnesses who said he was killed in Yankuba Toure's house, then the body was put in Peter's car or Edward's car, and they drove, you know, to somewhere, you know, and disposed of the car and the body and burnt and set it alight. So obviously, you know, details are now emerging clearly as to what have happened. But you also mentioned about his own, you know, security, where he was being trailed by one Baba Saho, an NIA officer. I think, I mean, he was being surveillance.
He was
under surveillance at some point. And
while he was investigating.
Yes, while he was investigating the matter until, you know, the then FRI Jammeh, one day called him and said, you know, you have to close the file.
Yeah, but the chairman had asked him to close the file.
Yes, and the file was closed, and then end of story.
Yeah.
You know,
and they also would tell us the other telltale signs, like they saw Edward's hand sort of in a bandage, Peter Singate's hand sort of in a bandage, and it seemed as if it was burnt.
Yeah.
And we also heard from another witness who said that with Yankuba Toure, when he on his uniform, there were burnt patches on the uniform.
Yes.
So there were telltale signs there, you know, exposing them.
I think with the Koro Sise case, you know, I think for some reason, you know, we should be thankful that at least, you know, there was something to show that it was staged, that this has happened, because I think it happened that way because then they were new into government, and they were trying to, you know, wipe out whatever trace would be there that people could follow, you know, and get to the bottom of things. But you realize that, I mean, towards, you know, Jammeh's, in the last 10 years of Jammeh's rule, people have got missing in this country. And
that's an interesting point. It was just because of their inexperience. Perhaps they were still jittery, still anxious about things, so they felt that at least they will give a nod to decency by at least trying to stage manage it. But afterwards, with the confidence, they just didn't care. They just disappeared.
Yeah. Yes, but earlier we heard from other witnesses who said, you know, Koro was murdered because of Edward Singate was jealous of him, because he was too close to the chairman, Yaya Jammeh at the time, and Yaya seems to trust Koro a lot. He actually confides in
But
Koro
surely not enough to protect him.
Yes. Okay.
Because in the end, Edward got his way.
Again, Edward would not let anybody come between him and Yaya Jammeh at the time.
And Yaya was perfectly happy to
But now, we've had other witnesses say Koro was murdered because of the budget speech. He was supposed to be delivered to the parliament. So obviously, another detail is emerging now, which is not only Edward was jealous, but something was to be revealed.
Absolutely.
We've seen that also.
Actually, in fact, around this period, I was around, we heard some of these things. There were rumors around. This place is quite interesting. It seems nobody can hide anything. It's just with the apparent November 11 incident. Everybody heard about these things. I was about to ask that. The planners, was there really a coup planned? It was quite interesting that it was quite carelessly, recklessly. Everybody heard about it. Was really actually a coup planned? I'm beginning to doubt it.
Yeah.
Even though there are fingers being pointed to people like maybe Fafanyang, Barrow, the second time, there are fingers being pointed.
I have a feeling. I have a feeling that in the process of trying to entrench themselves in power, you know, maybe they had this plan to silence, you know, some of these officers who they thought, you know, would not let them have it their way. Some of these disgruntled officers or officers who would have been seen as, you know, kind of putting up, you know, stumbling blocks for them, you know, along the way. So let's just silence them, and then we'll have it our way. Because if you can look at if you look at some of the officers who were allegedly were part of the November 11 foil coup, these were some of the best men we had in the army at the time. Senior officers, lieutenants.
Somebody said that. So don't you think, aren't you beginning to get the impression that, of course, they could sense a certain disgruntlement, and they knew how they manipulated the earlier disgruntlement around 1994 to do what they did. So perhaps to preempt, maybe there was talk of coup and that sort of thing, but one doesn't get the sense that it was actually planned, and you had people who were ready that night to go and fight. There was really no fighting anywhere.
Indeed. In fact, you have a point, because look at it this way. When they first came to power, all the senior officers were rounded up, taken to Mile 2. Now, they did that to secure themselves. Along the way, a few months later, because, of course, officers were talking here and there, we know, I mean, most of them were not hiding these things, they were saying it out. And because they knew it could lead to something else, they had to silence all of these people. I believe this is what I'm beginning to sense.
Remember when Mafuji, who was asking Mafuji, when Mafuji, you know, had to tell him, hey, look, I'm not part of this, I'm just a driver. So they tried to elicit from him the names, the people he brought over. So they really had no idea, they were just fishing. Fishing for names. You see, everything was shoddy, was amateurish, shoddy and that sort of thing. So one is beginning to get the impression that perhaps there was really no such thing. Earlier, Fajara Barracks, you know, we would be told about Fafanyang, and in the evening what happened. You see, these wives came. Now we are beginning to see what happened at home. One doesn't get the impression that they were planning as a group to go and stage a coup. They all seem ill-prepared. Yeah. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yes, fine. But then, Mr. Boch, back to Koro Sise. You know, I was thinking, what warranted them to allegedly assassinate Koro Sise? I don't understand. Because this is a man who wasn't part of the coup, a civilian working somewhere else. And he didn't come and introduce himself. Somebody brought him in. Obviously, then you hire him. If you know he would say something that you would not like during the budget speech,
just fire him.
Why not fire him?
I think
fire him immediately and he goes away. Obviously, in fact, if you know he's got enough information, you know, even if you threaten him and said, we don't want to hear a word from you, go home, go to do your things and relax, forget about us, he would comply at that point in time.
No, you know, when
what's the point of killing him? That's what I don't understand.
But it seems also there was a bloodthirsty element within.
Because the killing part of it is what I don't understand.
For me, Mboch, you know, when they took over, the catchwords at the time were probity, accountability, you know, those words they were using, you know, to garner support at the time. I want to believe because Koro, one, is a civilian, and two, because he must have been privy to a certain information, you know, which I think if it was out there would have painted the whole, you know, campaign of probity, accountability black. And because the fear maybe here is even if we sack him and now he's out there, you know, working as a free man, he could someday, I mean, this information out.
But
and
just
then it couldn't be good for them.
But what he's saying is, fine, we can just go and bang you up. We can put you in solitary confinement for God knows how long.
According to other witnesses, Sana Sabali and Sadibu were arrested with no justification.
No justification.
That they didn't plan to kill the chairman at the time.
Even Sana, I mean, I remember listening to his
So
interview
if that could happen, why can't it happen in Koro's case?
Absolutely.
Fine. Why can't they say he stole money? Take him to mile 2. Not to take his life.
Yeah, I just
there are
don't get
better
that,
ways
really.
to deal with the situation
You're
than
right.
kill him and on such brutality.
I agree.
Yes.
No doubt.
So there was a bloodthirsty element within, which was constitutive of the junta, their modus operandi. The very fact of killing was very much part of it.
Yeah.
Because afterwards we started hearing arguments about how the revolution afterwards was derailed. The revolution was never enrailed in the first place.
Quite
there was no
right.
revolution. There was merely lawlessness.
Quite right.
From day one, now we are beginning to see all of it. There was no plan.
Yes.
Yes.
They
Even the coup wasn't planned.
They was just making it up as they went along.
Yeah.
They were just making it up as they went along. And no doubt perhaps helped by the institutional failures, obviously.
Sure.
That was really, what was it?
So we quickly look at
So,
our final witness.
yes.
Pa Abibumbai.
Pa Abibu,
Yes.
yes, you're right.
He was a
CMC.
police CMC, crime management coordinator.
Okay, yes.
He also was, digging into the Koro Sisi assassination. His testimony actually had focused mainly on the Koro Sisi assassination.
He wasn't part of the investigative team, though, was he?
No, he wasn't.
Okay.
He wasn't. But he was. Investigating this. I remember he said, after Koro's assassination, the following morning, he also visited the alleged crime scene, and he said, of course, he made mention of the same things like Bojang had said in his testimony as well. No dent, no skid marks.
Number plate intact.
The number plate where it was, everything is intact, and he also began to, believe that really this was staged. In fact, I remember he said it was staged. Yeah. This was how he said it.
Even though it was not well done.
Yes, well done.
It was shoddy. It was a shoddy attempt.
Yeah.
It was just a very, very amateurish performance.
Yes,
yeah.
And he said because it's part of his job, he went to the mortuary, where Koro's remains were, to witness the post-mortem, But when he arrived, he said he found Lieutenant Peter Singate there, and he also did say in his testimony that Peter, of course, his left hand was bandaged, and and he was the one who said he looked at him in the face and said to him, "This man was never involved in an accident. You killed him." And when he said that, he said Peter actually looked at him and pulled a long face. He wasn't happy at all. He really wasn't happy with him. But he said at a point he didn't care. He just wanted to voice out what he had in him. So once he said that, and then looking at Peter's facial expression, he didn't feel comfortable as well.
He knew that he was inviting trouble.
Yes, so he had to leave, and that was how he left and went to his office. But then he said he was called the following day to by the then IGP, who said to him that Yankuba today would want to see you. So he said, okay. Then he went to Yankuba's office, quadrangle. And then he said, as soon as he entered the office, Yankuba just looked at him for 2 minutes without saying anything. And then he said to him, you can go. But he sasaid,
that was a message.
Yes, by looking at Yankuba's face, he could tell that really, it meant a lot. That, you've got to be careful, or you need to stay away from all of this. So when he went back to his office, I remember he said he was also being asked by the then IG, how far with the Koro case? And he said, well, I don't know anything about it, because he felt and he was reluctant to give him any information because he didn't feel safe anymore. He don't know who was who, and so because of that, he had to stop investigating the case.
Did he move his family as well?
Yes, but then he had to move his family, and he was also after, dismissed from his job as well. But then 9 months later, he was called back because they had this murder case, which they needed someone to do the investigation because they were investigating, but they couldn't really, they couldn't break through.
But it's somebody who suspected he will be dismissed because he wrote his handing over letter and everything and was prepared. The day he wrote, the following day he came, he was dismissed from service.
Yes. So that's it.
But he explained also details into the airport, how they park their vehicles. You know, he was the one who explained that when Koro parked his vehicle, Edward parked at one side, Yankuba on the other side, so that if Koro would come before them, obviously he has to wait for them.
Okay, so he was hemmed in.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So obviously he couldn't go out, so he has to wait for them, which is, you know, a very good trick. Because if he comes before us, he can't go home. He has to wait until we arrive. So obviously that's what happened, and that was how, you know, they were able to get Koro.
Yes, quite clearly now the picture emerging is that everything was planned. So this was the beginning of the fourth session, isn't it?
Yes.
So it will run until the 25th, is it? 25th of April, isn't it? Yes. And we understand that they're going to also have a break during the Ramadan. They'll take a break and the like.
Yes.
So right
but
now
they'll be
continuing
on their
with the committee work.
Yeah, what the hearings will.
Yes, but right now they perhaps towards the end of wrapping up the themes, the 11th of November and Koro Sise death. Yeah. So perhaps we'll move more to the junglers and other themes that they will cover in the future. I can't wait. We can't wait. Things have been fascinating. So thank you very much, viewers and listeners on Q Radio. We've come to the very end of our Trrc Roundup. Hopefully you will join us again next week. Thank you, Babakar Sise. Thank you, Ansumane Eso Nyasi, and thank you to our cameramen and woman. Thank you very much. See you next week. Bye-bye.